Life has a way of teaching us hard lessons. And if you're over 70, there's one mistake that's far too easy to fall into. I've seen it happen to friends. I've felt it creeping into my own life. And if you're not careful, it can quietly steal away your joy, your health, and even your independence. The mistake I'm talking about is letting yourself slow down too much. It sounds harmless at first. After all, you've worked hard your whole life. Maybe you've raised a family. Maybe you've spent decades building a career or serving your community. Now that you're in your golden years, there's a part of you that feels like you've earned the right to take it easy. And you have. But here's the problem. Too much rest, too much stillness, and too much comfort can become a dangerous trap. The less you move, the harder it gets to move. The less you engage with people, the easier it becomes to isolate yourself. The less you challenge your mind, the faster it starts to slip away. I've seen this happen time and time again. It's like a slow fade. At first, you might just skip a walk here and there because you don't feel like it. Or maybe you start spending more time on the couch because it's just easier that way. Before you know it, your muscles feel weaker. Your balance isn't what it used to be. Even simple things like standing up from a chair or climbing a small step can feel harder than they should. And that's when the real trouble starts. You see, once you start losing your strength and stability, you become more prone to falls. And for people our age, a fall isn't just a minor inconvenience. It can change everything. A broken hip, a fractured wrist, even something like a bump to the head can turn your life upside down. I had a dear friend named Joe who always seemed strong as an ox. But after he turned 75, he started slowing down. He told me, "I'm just tired more often these days." So he stopped going on his morning walks. He spent more time sitting in his favorite chair. The next time I saw him, I noticed he looked weaker. His shoulders were slumped. He wasn't standing as tall as he used to. Then one evening, Joe tripped on a rug in his hallway. He fractured his hip. That injury kept him in the hospital for weeks. And when he came home, he was never quite the same. His confidence was shaken. His energy was lower. And the man who once loved gardening and fixing things around the house now spent most of his time in front of the television. The decline was heartbreaking. But the worst part is that it could have been avoided. Joe didn't lose his strength all at once. It happened gradually because he let himself slow down. And I don't blame him. It's easy to do. I almost fell into the same trap myself. After I turned 70, I remember waking up one morning and thinking, I don't have the energy I used to. That day, I nearly convinced myself to skip my morning walk. But something inside me said, no, get up, get moving. So I forced myself to lace up my shoes and head out the door. And you know what? By the time I got home, I felt better. Not just physically, but mentally too. I realized that the moment I stopped pushing myself would be the moment I started to fade. And that's why I'm sharing this with you. If you're over 70, you must keep moving. I'm not talking about running marathons or spending hours in the gym. I mean simple things. Stretching in the morning, taking short walks, doing a few gentle exercises at home to keep your muscles strong and your joints flexible. Even light household chores like sweeping or folding laundry can help you stay active. The key is to avoid falling into the habit of doing less and less until you're barely moving at all. And it's not just about your body. Your mind needs exercise too. Read books, work on puzzles, have conversations that make you think. The moment you stop challenging your brain is the moment it starts to slow down. I've seen sharp, lively people become forgetful and confused simply because they stopped engaging their minds. And don't forget about your heart. Staying connected with people is one of the most powerful ways to keep your spirit strong. Call an old friend, invite a neighbor over for coffee, join a local group or club, even if you don't feel like it first. It's easy to let loneliness sneak in when you get older, but staying socially active keeps you happier, sharper, and healthier. I know some days it's hard. There are mornings when I wake up feeling stiff or tired, and it's tempting to just sit in my chair and take it easy. But every time I push myself to move, to engage, to connect with people, I feel better. And I know I'm giving myself the best chance to stay strong and independent for as long as possible. Don't let yourself fall into the trap of slowing down too much. You've worked hard your whole life, and you deserve to enjoy these years to the fullest. But the key to doing that is to keep moving, keep learning, and keep connecting. It's never too late to start. Whether you're 70 or 90, every little effort makes a difference. Your body will thank you, your mind will thank you, and your loved ones will thank you too. So please, don't make the mistake that took my friend Joe away from us too soon. Stay active, stay engaged, stay strong. You've got more life to live, and I believe you can make the most of it. Now, let's clear some common questions. What mindset shifts can empower older individuals to embrace movement and social connection as essential parts of their lifestyle? I remember a time when I almost gave in to that dangerous belief that aging means doing less. After I turned 70, I started feeling the pull of comfort more than ever. My morning walks didn't feel as easy as they once did. The thought of visiting friends or joining social events seemed tiring. I kept telling myself, I'm not as young as I used to be, and maybe it's time to slow down. Those thoughts felt logical, but what I didn't realize was that they were quietly shaping my reality. The less I moved, the weaker I felt. The less I engaged with people, the lonelier I became. I had convinced myself that this was just part of aging. But the truth is, it wasn't aging that was making me feel this way. It was my mindset. Everything changed when I had a conversation with an old friend named Frank. Frank was 82 years old at the time, yet he seemed stronger and sharper than I was. He still walked every morning. He volunteered at a local shelter. He always had stories to tell because he was constantly meeting new people. I asked him how he managed to stay so active and full of life. He smiled and said, "The secret isn't my body, it's my mind." He told me that years ago, he made a decision. He decided to stop seeing himself as an old man who was running out of time. Instead, he chose to believe that every day was a chance to keep building his strength, his mind, and his relationships. The minute you believe it's too late to improve, he said, you stop trying, and that's when you start to fade. That conversation hit me hard. I realized I'd been telling myself a dangerous story. I'd been acting like my body was too weak to move and my mind was too tired to connect with people. But what if I changed that story? What if I started telling myself that movement was what kept me strong and that staying connected was what kept me young at heart? I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I decided to give it a try. The first thing I did was challenge my belief that rest was what my body needed most. For too long, I had treated my aches and pains as reasons to stay still. But Frank's words kept ringing in my head. So the next morning, I put on my shoes and went for a walk. I told myself I didn't have to go far, just 10 minutes down the road and back. At first, my legs felt heavy and I kept thinking about how easy it would be to turn around. But I kept walking. By the time I reached the 10-minute mark, I felt a little stronger. My heart was beating a little faster and my body felt more awake. Something amazing happened when I got home. I realized I wasn't tired like I thought I'd be. I felt energized. That day, I promised myself I would keep moving, even when my mind tried to convince me to sit still. Over time, I started adding a few simple stretches in the morning. Nothing fancy, just enough to loosen my joints and get my blood flowing. I started using a small set of dumbbells to keep my arms strong. And every day, I reminded myself that movement wasn't something I was forcing my body to do. It was something I was giving my body as a gift. Each step I took, each stretch I did, was like telling my body, I still believe in you. But movement alone wasn't enough. I knew I needed to challenge the other belief I had been holding on to, the one that told me socializing wasn't worth the effort anymore. For months, I had convinced myself that people wouldn't notice if I kept to myself. After all, they had their own busy lives. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. So one afternoon, I picked up the phone and called an old friend I hadn't spoken to in months. I didn't have a big reason call. I just wanted to say hello. We ended up talking for almost an hour, laughing about old memories and catching up on each other's lives. When I hung up the phone, I felt lighter, almost as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. That one call reminded me how powerful human connection really is. I started reaching out to people more often. Sometimes I invited a neighbor over for coffee. Other times, I stopped by the local community center just to chat with folks. Little by little, I felt more like myself again. The more I connected with people, the more I realized that relationships aren't just good for the heart, they're good for the mind too. Conversations made me think. Stories made me laugh. And being around other people reminded me that I still had value, that my presence mattered. Looking back, I can tell you this. The biggest change didn't come from exercising more or socializing more. It came from deciding to believe something different about myself. I stopped seeing my age as a reason to do less and started seeing it as a reason to do more. I told myself that movement wasn't just important, it was essential. I reminded myself that connection wasn't just nice, it was necessary. And most importantly, I decided to believe that my best days weren't behind me. They were still unfolding, as long as I kept showing up for them. How can seniors rebuild strength, energy, and social confidence if they've already fallen into this pattern of slowing down? I remember when I found myself in that very place. I had convinced myself that my body was too tired and that people wouldn't miss me anyway. Days turned into weeks, and soon my muscles felt weak and my mind felt dull. It wasn't until I visited an old friend that I realized how much I had let myself slip away. My friend, who was my age, seemed stronger and sharper than I was. He told me something that changed my mindset. "Your body isn't giving up on you," he said. "You just stopped giving it reasons to stay strong." Those words stayed with me, and I decided to make a change. The first thing I did was stop thinking that exercise had to be intense or exhausting. I didn't need to lift heavy weights or jog for miles. Instead, I started small. Each morning, I stood up from my chair and did 10 slow squats. It wasn't easy at first. My legs trembled and my knees ached. But I reminded myself that strength doesn't come from comfort. It comes from effort. After a few days, those squats started to feel easier. So I added a few arm exercises using light weights. The weights were nothing more than water bottles at first, but they made a difference. My arms felt stronger, and I noticed my posture improving. One of the biggest changes came when I started walking again. At first, I only walked to the end of my driveway and back. Then I walked to the corner of my street. Each time I walked a little farther, I felt something waking up inside me, a quiet confidence that I hadn't felt in a long time. The soreness in my muscles wasn't a sign that I was weak. It was a sign that I was rebuilding what I had lost. But strength alone wasn't enough. I knew I needed to rebuild my energy too. For too long, I had been waking up tired and going to bed even more exhausted. I realized that my mind had fallen into the habit of thinking everything required too much effort. So I started challenging those thoughts. When I woke up feeling sluggish, I reminded myself that energy doesn't just appear. It grows when you give your body movement and purpose. Instead of staying in bed longer, I got up and stretched. Instead of sitting in my chair all afternoon, I spent a few minutes tidying up my living room or walking outside to breathe fresh air. The more I moved, the more energy I felt. It wasn't always easy, but I kept reminding myself that movement creates momentum. Rebuilding my social confidence took the most courage. After months of isolating myself, I felt awkward about reaching out to people again. I kept telling myself they wouldn't notice if I stayed quiet. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. So I started small. I called a neighbor and invited her over for coffee. The conversation felt a bit rusty at first, but before long, we were sharing stories and laughing like old times. That one visit gave me the courage to do more. I started joining a local walking group, even though I worried I'd be too slow. To my surprise, the people in the group were warm and encouraging. Some of them walked faster than me, and some walked slower. But no one judged me. They just seemed glad that I was there. With each step I took, whether it was a morning stretch, a short walk, or a phone call to an old friend, I started to feel more like myself again. I realized that I didn't have to accept weakness, fatigue, or loneliness as my new reality. My body was still capable of growing stronger. My mind was still able to feel sharper. My heart was still able to connect with others. If you're feeling stuck right now, I want you to know that it's never too late to turn things around. Start by challenging the voice in your head that tells you it's too hard or that you're too old. That voice isn't telling you the truth. The truth is that your body is waiting for you to move. Your mind is waiting for you to engage, and your relationships are waiting for you to reach out. Take one small step today, whether it's standing up and stretching, walking to the mailbox, or calling a friend. That one step may feel small, but it's powerful because it's the first sign that you're choosing to move forward instead of slipping further back. What inspiring stories or examples demonstrate the power of staying active, mentally engaged, and socially connected after 70? I remember a man named George who lived just down the street from me. George had always been a quiet man who kept to himself. But when his wife passed away in his early 70s, he seemed to shrink even more into his shell. He stopped going out much, and people barely saw him anymore. One day, I spotted George walking slowly past my house with a determined look on his face. When I asked where he was headed, he told me he had joined a local gardening club. It started as nothing more than a way to get out of the house, but soon that little step became something much bigger. Each morning, George would head to the community garden, and each evening, he would come home with dirt under his fingernails and a smile on his face. He started making friends with people who shared his love for plants, and before long, he was sharing tips and even leading a small group of new gardeners. The change in him was incredible. His once quiet and tired face now carried a sense of pride and purpose. By staying active in that garden, George had found his strength again, not just physically, but emotionally too. Then there was Margaret. She had always been sharp-minded, but when her eyesight began to fail in her late 70s, she feared she was losing the ability to stay engaged with the world. For a while, she stopped reading, stopped writing letters, and even avoided conversations because she felt embarrassed when she couldn't recognize faces clearly. But Margaret wasn't one to give up easily. One day, she visited the library and asked if they had audiobooks. Listening to those stories brought her back to life. Before long, she was attending book clubs and surprising everyone with her sharp memory and thoughtful insights. Margaret didn't just listen to those books. She challenged herself to learn new things, and her mind stayed as sharp as ever. Eventually, she began volunteering at a local school, helping young children who were struggling with their reading. The kids loved her gentle voice and patient nature, and Margaret once again felt that sense of connection and purpose she thought she had lost. I'll never forget my friend Thomas either. Thomas had always been a strong and athletic man, but after a bad fall in his early 70s, he felt his body wasn't what it used to be. He started believing that his days of staying active were over. But his daughter refused to let him give up. She convinced him to try yoga, something Thomas thought was ridiculous at first. But little by little, those gentle stretches and breathing exercises helped him regain his balance and confidence. I remember watching him walk down the street one day, back straight, shoulders proud, and I knew Thomas had found his way back. He even joined a small hiking group, and by the time he turned 80, he was leading younger folks up trails and showing them how to move with strength and care. Another story that still warms my heart is about a woman named Helen. Helen had always been the life of the party, but as her friends started passing away and her family became busier with their own lives, she found herself feeling lonely. Instead of retreating into sadness, Helen made a bold decision. She started hosting weekly game nights at her home, inviting neighbors, friends, and even strangers from her local church. At first, only a few people showed up, but soon her living room was filled with laughter and conversation every week. Helen wasn't just socializing. She was creating a space where people felt connected, valued, and loved. Her home became a place of warmth, and Helen found that by opening her door to others, she had filled her own life with joy again. And then there's my own story. There was a time in my life when I believed I had done everything I was meant to do. My children were grown, my career was long behind me, and I felt like my days were best spent just sitting quietly and letting the world pass by. But something inside me knew better. So I began writing down my thoughts, memories, lessons I had learned, and stories from my past. What started as scribbles in a notebook turned into something much more meaningful. I began sharing my writings with others, and to my surprise, people connected with my words. It made me realize that even in my later years, I still had wisdom and experience worth sharing. Writing gave me purpose again, and that purpose filled me with energy I thought I had lost. These stories all have one thing in common. The people in them refused to let age become an excuse to stop living fully. They didn't let weakness, loss, or fear take away their spirit. Instead, they kept moving, kept learning, and kept reaching out to others. Each step they took, whether it was digging in a garden, listening to a book, practicing yoga, or inviting people into their home, was a sign that they believed their lives still mattered. If you're feeling like life has slowed down or lost its spark, I want you to know that you're not alone. There are people just like you who have faced that same feeling and found a way forward. Strength can be rebuilt, energy can return, and connections with others can become richer than you ever imagined. The secret lies in taking that first step, no matter how small. Maybe it's a short walk outside. Maybe it's calling an old friend or learning something new. Whatever it is, that first step is the start of something powerful. The truth is, life doesn't stop giving you opportunities just because you've reached a certain age. Your body still wants to move. Your mind still wants to explore. And your heart still longs to connect. Don't let doubt convince you that it's too late. The most inspiring stories are written by people who choose to keep turning the pages.